every neighborhood, there's always someone who acts like they own the place. Someone who believes their clipboard gives them authority over everyone else's life. At Whispering Pines, that someone was Karen Greystone, president of the HOA for 8 years running, self-appointed queen of the cul-de-sac. But this summer, she picked the wrong family to mess with. It started on a blistering Sunday afternoon. The community BBQ, an annual event Karen ran like a military operation. Hot dogs exactly 3 per family. No outside drinks allowed unless they were approved. Decorations had to be HOA themed. Even the potato salad had to pass her ridiculous presentation test. But this year, Mark Jameson and his daughter Ellie decided to show up. They'd just moved into months prior, into the restored Craftsman on Hawthorne Drive. Mark was quiet, respectful, never bragged. Most folks didn't even realize he was the district attorney for the entire county. Ellie, his 16-year-old daughter, was soft-spoken, artistic, and allergic to peanuts. She wore a bright red allergy bracelet, not that Karen noticed. Or maybe she did. At the BBQ, Ellie wandered over to the dessert table. A massive setup, lined with labeled Tupperware containers. Karen stood nearby, arms crossed, watching like a hawk in pearls. "You should try this one," Karen said, placing a cookie on a napkin and handing it directly to Ellie. "It's my secret recipe. People say it's addictive." Ellie smiled. Politely, "Thanks, but I have allergies." Karen smirked. "Oh, it's not free. I made it myself." "Don't worry, dear." Ellie took a bite. Half a cookie, then wandered off toward the bounce house area. 10 minutes later, she collapsed. Mark rushed across the field like a freight train. One moment, she was a pride. The next, she was convulsing in the grass. Panic spread fast. Someone screamed for help. Another guest called 911, and Karen, she just stood there, sipping sweet tea, her lips twitching into something almost smug. "She probably got too much sun," she murmured to no one in particular. Paramedics arrived. Ellie was unconscious, her pulse erratic. They loaded her into the ambulance. Mark rode beside her, jaw clenched, heart pounding. At the hospital, doctors ran blood work. When the results came back, their faces went pale. Ellie hadn't just ingested peanuts. There were traces of diphenhydramine, a strong antihistamine, far more than the standard dose, enough to cause confusion, rapid heartbeat, and if mixed with allergens, loss of consciousness. That wasn't accidental. That wasn't clumsiness. That was sabotage. Back at Whispering Pines, Karen sent out a chipper HOA newsletter the next morning. No mention of Ellie, no apology. Just a passive-aggressive note about how parents should closely supervise their children at community functions to avoid unfortunate incidents. She even included a photo of herself at the BBQ, smiling beside the dessert table. Mark read the email from his phone while sitting at Ellie's bedside. He didn't say a word, just stared at the screen as his daughter slept, and for drip running down her arm, her breathing shallow. That smile on Karen's face, that smirk, that was all he needed. Because what Karen didn't know was that she hadn't just messed with someone's daughter. She drugged the daughter of the district attorney, and he was about to come knocking. Narrator, lower tone, drawing suspense. Karen thought she was untouchable, that no one would question her cookies, her camera malfunctions, or her HOA power plays. But this time she crossed a line she couldn't walk back from, because justice was coming, and it wasn't going to be polite. When someone hurts your child, everything changes. Your world narrows, time slows, and every instinct inside you shifts from peace to war. Mark Jameson had spent years upholding the law, prosecuting criminals, cleaning up dirty politics. But now, his daughter was lying in a hospital bed, pale as the sheets beneath her, her lips cracked and barely moving. And the one person responsible was walking around the neighborhood, smiling at neighbors, pruning hedges, planning the next HOA meeting like nothing ever happened. He didn't need a badge to know it was intentional, but he needed proof. 3 days after the barbecue, the hospital lab sent over the toxicology report. Mark was there when the doctor reviewed the findings. Ellie tested positive for diphenhydramine. The doctor said, pushing up his glasses, a significant dose, far higher than anything you'd find in over-the-counter medicine. Combined with her allergy reaction, it could have been lethal. Mark nodded slowly, jaw tightening. Could that have been in something she ate? The doctor hesitated. Yes, most likely ingested, possibly disguised in food. That was all Mark needed to hear. He made a call from the hospital parking lot, voice sharp, words short. 30 minutes later, Detective Lena Vargas pulled up in an unmarked car. Lena wasn't your average investigator. Former Marine. No patience for politics. And no love for HOA letters. She stood 5'9" in flat boots and a leather jacket, her presence louder than a megaphone. Mark handed her the lab report. I need you off the record for now. Quiet, discreet, and thorough. Lena skimmed it and whistled under her breath. Diphenhydramine. That's not just an oopsie. That's someone trying to make a kid pass out. She was handed a cookie. By name. Lena's eyes narrowed. You think it was the HOA queen. I think she's hiding something. And I think she's done this before. That night, Lena visited Whispering Pines. No badge. Just a clipboard and a friendly smile. Said she was conducting a community health survey on food safety practices. Karen, ever eager to show off, led her straight to the dessert table area. From the barbecue, still half set in her garage. Labeled bins, plastic containers, even leftover cookies, ziplocked and frozen for later, Karen said with a wink. Lena asked politely for a few samples. Karen, flattered, offered extras. Said, they're addictive, you'll see. Lena took the bags and left. Back at the crime lab, she had them tested. 2 days later, the results came back. Multiple cookies tested positive for the same antihistamine found in Ellie's blood. Every single one had traces of peanut oil, despite the label reading nut-free. Lena didn't sleep that night. She returned to Whispering Pines the next morning and went door to door. First was Mrs. Dalrymple, the neighborhood's oldest and nosiest resident. 90 years old, sharp as ever, binoculars always by the window. She invited Lena in for tea and gossip. Karen switched the labels. Mrs. Dalrymple whispered, I saw her. Took one from the red tray and stuck it in that poor girl's hand. I told my cat something was off about that woman. Lena recorded the testimony. Next was Todd Grayson, the HOAS treasurer. Nervous, then, always sweating. He cracked faster than a dropped egg. She told me to delete the security footage from that day, he said. Said it was a malfunction, but the system was fine. She just didn't want people seeing her near the dessert table. Why didn't you say anything? Lena asked. She threatened to have my deck removed for non-compliance. My wife would have left me. Back at the hospital, Ellie was slowly improving. Her memory was still foggy, but she remembered Karen. She remembered the smirk. She remembered how the cookie tasted strange, like medicine. Mark sat beside her, one hand on hers, the other gripping his phone as he read Lena's findings. This wasn't some freak accident. This was premeditated, and it wasn't the first time Karen had done this before. And now, it was time for Mark to stop being a dad on the sidelines and become the prosecutor. Who didn't blink? Narrator tense pause. Karen smiled when she thought she'd gotten away with it. But that smile, it's about to be wiped off her face. By the time most people knew what Karen had done, it was already too late. But for Detective Lena Vargas, the clock was just starting. The question wasn't whether Karen had something to hide. It was just how deep the deception went. And Whispering Pines was full of whispers no one had ever really listened to. Until now. Lena stood in front of the HOA community hall, staring up at the security cameras mounted under the eaves. Karen had told the neighborhood the BBQ footage was lost due to Wi-Fi failure. But Lena had seen the system up close. It wasn't wireless. It was hardwired, and every angle of the park had been recorded for years. She requested access to the HOA's cloud archive. Karen denied it immediately. Due to system maintenance, that footage is unfortunately unrecoverable, she wrote. In her reply, complete with a little smiley face emoji. That wasn't just shady. That was obstruction. Lena brought it to Mark, who was now sitting in a private study, boxes of old case files open, trying not to punch holes through the drywall. Can I get a judge to authorize a warrant? She asked him bluntly. He didn't hesitate. I'll pull the right strings, but it won't just be for the footage. I want her emails, internal HOA communications, anything she's ever sent regarding community events. Lena nodded. Then I'm going back out. Someone else knows something. I can feel it. She returned to the neighborhood with a new tactic, quiet, casual conversations that felt like gossip but dug like scalpels. First up was Roger and Lynn Parsons, parents of a teenage boy named Caleb who'd had a mysterious reaction at the HOA ice cream social last year. He got dizzy after a scoop of the pistachio, Lynn said, her voice tight. But we thought it was just heat stroke. Lena asked what happened next. Lynn paused. Karen called that night, told us not to make a fuss, said it would reflect poorly on us as new neighbors. It felt weird, like she was warning us. Next was Marcus Weller, a high school science teacher. He remembered the BBQ too well. I saw her throw something in the trash right after that girl collapsed, he said. A plastic container, red lid. She looked over her shoulder first. Lena asked why he didn't say anything. He looked embarrassed. She's been president of the HOA for so long. It felt dangerous to cross her. My trash got flagged for a violation last month just for being at the curb 6 minutes early. Then came the final visit that made Lena stop dead in her tracks. Barbara Cartwright, HOA secretary for the past 6 years, wore orthopedic shoes, whereupon in church, and kept everything, and Lena meant everything, printed and filed. She brought out a binder labeled community incidents. Inside were records Karen had never publicly shared, food complaints, anonymous emails, notes about kids falling ill, scribbled comments from Karen like handled, no escalation necessary, and dismissed as overreaction. But one page stood out. A typed email from Karen, marked 2 years prior. Subject line, compliance through comfort. It detailed an experiment for light behavioral correction using mood-affecting substances in baked goods. Lena froze. This isn't just reckless. This is calculated. Barbara nodded slowly. I didn't know what she really meant. I just followed orders. She always made it sound like she was doing it for the community's good. Lena took the folder, sealed it in an evidence bag, and called Mark immediately. He didn't speak at first, just breathed. Then, it's worse than we thought. That night, Karen threw a small cocktail party on her lawn, laughing with select neighbors. Glass of wine in hand, like the queen of a kingdom no one could challenge. She didn't know the walls were closing in. She didn't know that Detective Vargas now had enough to request a full warrant. She didn't know that her little cookie strategy had left behind fingerprints, timestamps, and a digital trail, longer than her list of neighborhood citations. Narrator. Some villains wear masks. Others wear gardening gloves and bake sales smiles. But no mask stays on forever. Some crimes happen in the dark. But Karen's crimes, they were baked in broad daylight and served with a smile. After collecting testimonies, tainted cookies, and a binder full of disturbing notes, Detective Lena Vargas walked into the county courthouse with one goal. Get that warrant. She didn't even need the full report to make the judge's eyebrows shoot up. Compliance through comfort? He read aloud, his tone sharp. You're saying the president of an HOA admitted, in writing, to drugging her neighbors? Not in those exact words, Lena replied, but it's all there. Between the lines, in the cupcakes, and probably still in her pantry. The warrant was signed that afternoon. At 6:42 the next morning, Lena pulled up to Karen Greystone's perfectly manicured lawn. Two deputies followed in plain clothes, stepping out in silence. They didn't need lights. They didn't need sirens. The truth would do the shouting. Karen answered the door in a lavender robe, face half done, hair clipped back like a suburban villain mid-makeover. Well, this is unexpected, she said, eyeing the papers in Lena's hand. Karen Greystone, Lena said evenly. We have a warrant to search your property in relation to the hospitalization of Ellie Jameson and others at HOA-sponsored events. Karen's expression didn't flicker. Oh, this is absolutely ridiculous. Good, Lena said, brushing past her. Then you've got nothing to worry about. The kitchen was pristine, almost too pristine. Granite counters, labeled, containers, rows of spice jars in alphabetical order. It felt like walking into the set of a cooking show, but one where the host might be plotting poison behind the scenes. Then came the pantry. At first glance, everything looked normal. But behind the rice and flour sacks, Lena spotted something odd. A locked wooden box, hidden behind a shelf panel that had been clearly moved before. Karen, she called out. Can you explain this locked container in your pantry? Karen hesitated. That's personal. It's my grandmother's recipes. Let's see them. Karen didn't answer. Deputies forced the box open. Inside were handwritten notes, not recipes, but logs, dosage records, food names, lists of individuals with small notations beside their names. Too loud, late dues, yard violation, disrespectful. Ellie's name was there, in bold, underlined twice, next to her name, peanut sensitive. Tridiphenhydramine. See effect. Lena didn't blink. She turned the page. There were schedules for every major HOA event in the last 2 years, and for each, notes on what food was served, who ate what, and what the results were. Some were marked with smiley faces, others with check marks. One entry simply read, complied. Karen was standing by the counter, arms crossed, stone-faced. You kept notes? Lena asked. Karen tilted her head. We all have to manage things somehow. Some people just need encouragement. This isn't encouragement. This is a felony. Karen scoffed. You can't prove intent. Lena held up the notebook. Your cookies literally have footnotes. As the deputies photographed every inch of the kitchen, they opened the freezer. Inside, Tupperware, dozens of labeled treats, ice, cream social 2023, holiday pie samples, deck, BBQ batch, peanut-free, all sealed, all waiting. Lena didn't say a word. She just stared. Mark arrived minutes later. Karen tried to wave him off with a brittle smile. I hope you're not letting personal feelings cloud your judgment. Mr. Jameson. He stepped inside the kitchen. eyes landing on the notebook Lena had handed him. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't throw a punch. He just stood there, reading his daughter's name written down like she was a lab rat in some twisted experiment. "I'm not here as a father," he said, his voice calm and chilling. "I'm here as someone who puts predators like you behind bars." Karen's lips curled. "I've done nothing wrong," she said. "I run this community. I keep it in line. You'll see. They'll side with me. They always do." But Lena knew better, because behind every perfect neighborhood was a list of things people were too afraid to say. But now, people were starting to talk. Loudly, narrator. Karen thought her HOA title made her powerful, but her recipe box just exposed her as something far more dangerous. In every HOA, there's a line no one dares cross, in Whispering Pines. That line had a name, Karen Greystone. For years, neighbors whispered behind closed doors, nodded politely at block parties, and smiled through clenched teeth. She enforced rules with the precision of a drill sergeant and punished disorder, like it was a personal insult. But now, that fear was cracking. After Detective Lena Vargas and her team unearthed logs, frozen evidence, and dosage notes from Karen's kitchen, the case was no longer about one poison cookie. It was about control. And it was about time it ended. The morning after the search, Lena visited the HOA clubhouse, a modest brick building next to the tennis courts. With Mark's legal clearance and the signed warrant in hand, she entered the storage office. The walls were lined with filing cabinets labeled by year. Inside them, newsletters, meeting notes, violation reports, all meticulously preserved. But tucked behind the 2022 folder, she found something unusual. A thick envelope, sealed with red wax and marked private KG only. Inside was a printed list titled Residents of Concern. Beside each name were brief descriptions. Not of rule breaking, not of violations, but of personal behavior. 1. Read. Too friendly with other board members, manipulative tendencies. Another, unmarried, possibly gay, may challenge leadership. And then Ellie's name again, new family, high-profile parent, strong-willed teen, potential, disruptor. These weren't just notes, they were profiles. Karen had been documenting anyone who might challenge her authority and punishing them with cookies, citations, and, when needed, isolation. Later that day, Lena and Mark sat in his office, stacks of files between them. "This wasn't about food," Mark said slowly. "It was psychological warfare." Lena nodded. She ran Whispering Pines like a lab, and these people were her test subjects. Word had already started spreading. Todd, the HOA treasurer, officially resigned that morning. He wrote an open letter to the community, detailing how Karen forced him to delete camera footage under threats of permanent community penalties. 2 more board members followed, including the vice president, who confessed that Karen would draft anonymous complaints and force him to deliver them as if they came from other residents. That night, a special emergency HOA meeting was called. Karen showed up in a beige power suit, lipstick perfect, heels clicking against the concrete like a warning bell. She took her place at the head of the table, but the room was already different. Neighbors who once avoided her gaze were now staring directly at her, angry, betrayed, emboldened. Mark stood at the podium. "Some of you may have heard rumors," he began. "I'm here to confirm them. My daughter, Ellie, was intentionally drugged at the last community barbecue by someone in this very room." Gasps echoed. A few people began to stand. Mark held up a sealed evidence bag. Inside, one of the cookies, pulled from Karen's freezer. These cookies were laced with high doses of antihistamines. We have video, handwritten logs, and multiple witness statements confirming the source. Karen stood abruptly. This is slander, she snapped. You have no proof I intended harm. Those logs were personal, taken out of context. Lena rose. From the back. We also have tampered footage, deleted HOA records, and a logged file system you never disclosed to your board. Your context, she said, is going to be laid out in front of a judge. For a moment, Karen's composure wobbled. Then someone shouted from the back of the room. It was Mrs. Dalrymple. I told you all, she said, shaking a bony finger. That woman has been poisoning the community since 2019. My dog got sick at her Christmas brunch. The crowd broke into murmurs. Karen turned to leave, but found 3 deputies standing by the door. You're not going anywhere, one said. Narrator. Karen thought her clipboard made her untouchable, but her neighbors were no longer afraid. The queen of the HOA was cornered, her lies laid bare, her kingdom turning on her faster than she ever imagined. When a house starts to burn, it's never the flames that cause the most damage. It's what the smoke reveals. And as Karen Greystone's reputation turned to ash, the smoke was thick, black, and full of secrets. After the emergency HOA meeting ended in chaos and handcuffs, Karen was escorted back to her home under supervision. The neighbors watched from their porches. Some whispered, some recorded, and 1 or 2 smiled. Inside the house, Detective Lena Vargas had already cleared the kitchen, the office, the upstairs closet labeled board business only. But she hadn't yet touched the garage. It was time. With Karen locked in a squad car out front, Lena opened the side door into the garage, and the moment she stepped in, she knew something was off. Everything was organized. Too organized. Rows of labeled bins, HOA event supplies in vacuum-sealed bags, a filing cabinet with neighborhood maps dating back 10 years. And in the far corner, beneath a dusty plastic tarp, was a second freezer. Not the kitchen kind. Industrial. Lena walked toward it. One of the deputies flinched slightly as the cold hiss escaped when the lid opened. Inside, more containers. Each one carefully stacked, labeled, and dated. None of them matched the publicly known HOA events. Instead, the labels were cryptic. Response test A mild. Compliance batch, spring group. Subject, MJ. 1/4 dose. Lena's hands shook as she lifted one container from the bottom. Inside were dozens of cookies and bars, neatly packed in wax paper. Each one tagged with initials and dosage. Amounts. Next to the containers, a tattered notebook. More handwritten notes. This wasn't Karen baking out of boredom. This was chemical conditioning. A pattern. An operation. And the initials on some of those tags, they matched neighbors' names, including MJ Ellie's initials. One note stood out. Tested stronger diphenhydramine plus protein allergen. Result, effective. Subject collapsed. No further interaction from father yet. Lena turned to the deputy. Get this logged and sealed. Now, out front, Karen sat in the cruiser, staring straight ahead, not flinching, not blinking. Her silence was louder than screaming. Back at the precinct, the notebook was reviewed. Mark sat across the table, flipping through page after page. His face didn't move, but his knuckles were white. Karen hadn't just targeted Ellie. There were references. 2 toddlers, teenagers, elderly neighbors, anyone who questioned her, anyone who spoke up at meetings, anyone who didn't comply. All documented, all dosed. This wasn't just about one sick child at a barbecue. This was about a woman who had used the HOA system to carry out a long-term, intentional campaign of chemical coercion under the guise of community order. And the most damning part, The dosage levels in several of the frozen desserts had increased over time. It was escalating. From inconvenience to injury, from discomfort to collapse. And if Ellie hadn't been rushed to the hospital, the dose she received, combined with her peanut allergy, could have ended in more than just a scare. It could have been fatal. That night, the local news stations got wind of the story. Karen's mugshot hit every screen in the county. The headline, HOA president accused. In neighborhood drugging scandal. Neighbors flooded the station with calls. Lena's phone didn't stop buzzing. And Mark, he sat beside Ellie's bed, gently tucking her sketchpad under her fingers as she finally began to sleep peacefully. Her color was coming back. Her smile had returned, faint but real. He looked down at her and whispered, "She picked the wrong family." They say justice is blind. But when Karen Greystone walked into the courthouse, every eye in the building turned to look. She didn't arrive in handcuffs. She came in heels. Beige blazer. Fresh blowout. That same thin-lipped smirk she wore to every HOA meeting, like nothing and no one could touch her. But today was different. Today, Karen wasn't holding a clipboard. Today, Karen was the defendant. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed as neighbors gathered with signs. One read, "Cookies shouldn't come with side effects." Another, "Justice for Whispering Pines." Inside, the gallery was packed. Mark Jameson sat quietly behind the prosecution table. Not as a lawyer. Not as the DA. He'd recused himself from the case the moment it became personal. And instead, handed it to a fierce young prosecutor named Nina Patel, who'd made her name going after white-collar criminals, who thought they were smarter than the system. And Karen, she had hired a private defense attorney from Atlanta, slick, expensive, full of loopholes. But even he looked nervous. The charges were read aloud. The list was long. Aggravated battery, tampering with food, reckless endangerment, evidence destruction intent, to cause bodily harm through chemical means. And then, conspiracy. Karen's only reaction, a long, slow blink. The prosecution began with the surveillance data. Lena had worked for weeks recovering what Karen had tried to erase. The BBQ footage, the garage freezer, the dosed cookies, and the names written next to them. It was all laid out, frame by frame, page by page. Then came the witnesses. First, Todd, the treasurer, who admitted he was pressured to delete footage. Then Mrs. Dalrymple, who gave her testimony with trembling hands, but razor-sharp memory. "I saw her switch the labels. Don't you tell me I didn't. That girl bit that cookie and went down like a sack of bricks." The defense tried to argue it was hearsay. Karen's lawyer called it coincidence, misunderstanding, mismanaged food. But then came the most powerful moment. Ellie took the stand. 16 years old. Still pale, still a little shaky. But her voice didn't crack once. "She told me the cookie was safe," Ellie said. She smiled. "She called me sweetie. Then I woke up in an ambulance." She glanced briefly at Karen. And Karen finally looked away. For the first time, the smirk was gone. Nina Patel stood up. "Ellie, do you believe Mrs. Greystone knowingly gave you something that would hurt you?" Ellie nodded. "Yes." "Why? Because I think she wanted to scare my dad." The courtroom went still. Karen's lawyer objected, but it was too late. The jury had already seen it in her eyes. This wasn't about cookies. This was about control. Outside the courtroom, local media ran the story all day. HOA presidents across the state were suddenly under scrutiny. Whispering Pines officially disbanded its existing board that same week. Residents began writing a new charter, one that wouldn't give any one person unchecked power. As the case drew to a close, The final witness was called Detective Lena Vargas. She walked in with her usual calm, her tone factual, her words tight. The defendant kept a handwritten log detailing when and how she modified food. She documented behavioral changes. She listed names, dosages, reactions. She called it a system. Did she ever express remorse? No, Lena said. She expressed satisfaction. The judge called for recess before closing arguments. And as people filtered out of the courtroom, someone yelled from the back row, "She did it to my kid, too." Karen's head dropped slightly. It was happening. The persona was cracking. And soon, the sentence would follow. Narrator, Karen thought she could manipulate the system the same way she manipulated her neighbors. With charm, denial, and a threat. Behind every rule. But in a courtroom, charm turns to silence. Denial turns to evidence. And threats turn to prison time. Justice doesn't always come quickly. But when it comes, it's loud. Karen Greystone returned to court for the final time, wearing the same pearl necklace she'd worn the day she handed Ellie that cookie. She thought it gave her authority. What it really did was remind everyone exactly who she'd pretended to be. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours. They returned with a unanimous verdict. Guilty on all counts. Karen didn't flinch. Not when the judge listed the charges. Not when the sentence was handed down. 12 years in state prison, no chance of parole for 6. The courtroom gasped. Some clapped. Karen's lawyer leaned toward her, whispering something with urgency. She didn't respond. She just stared straight ahead. As if she still believed this was all beneath her. But outside, the world had moved on. Without her. Whispering Pines officially dissolved the HOA within the month. A new neighborhood committee was formed, this time with rotating leadership and no singular authority. Gone were the citations for mailbox paint, lawn edging, or garbage bins an inch too far from the curb. The community that once feared speaking out, now they couldn't stop. Neighbors who'd been isolated came together. Families who'd avoided the block parties started hosting them. The clubhouse became a shared space again, not a throne room. And Ellie recovered. Her allergies didn't go away, but the fear started to fade. With therapy, time, and more art than ever, she found herself again. The smile returned. The drawings turned brighter. She even painted a mural on the back wall of the clubhouse. It was of a tree. Branches full of birds, kids playing beneath it. And just beneath the roots, in barely noticeable gray paint, a hand letting go of a leash. Mark visited her art class one afternoon and watched her work in silence. He hadn't said much about the trial since the sentencing. But as she mixed colors, she looked up at him and asked, "Is it over now?" And he gave her the most honest answer he could. "It is for us, but for her, it's just beginning." He was right. Because 3 weeks into her prison sentence, a routine inspection of Karen's property, now under state forfeiture, uncovered a hidden crawl space beneath the garage. Inside, an old laptop, not registered in any HOA system, password protected, hidden under a loose floorboard behind the shelving. When investigators cracked it, they discovered something no one expected. Video files. Hundreds. Some were raw footage from old HOA events, from angles not matching any official security cameras. Others were personal clips, secretly recorded conversations between residents, caught without consent. Even footage inside people's homes during parties, likely filmed through windows or open doors. One folder stood out. It was titled, "If They Turn on Me." Inside were letters, drafts of emails, legal strategies, and worst of all, blackmail material. Photos of board members in compromising situations. Audio clips of private conversations taken wildly out of context. Karen had been ready to burn the whole neighborhood down. if she ever lost control. And now, it was all evidence. Additional charges were filed within days. The state extended her sentence. Investigators widened the scope, checking if Karen had used similar tactics in her previous neighborhood, the one she'd left after a dispute. What they found wasn't pretty, it turns out. This wasn't Karen's first HOA, and it wasn't her first scandal, but it would be her last. Narrator. Karen thought the rules didn't apply to her. She wrote her own, broke others, hid behind smiles and bylaws and a plate of homemade cookies. But eventually, the truth rotted through. Justice didn't knock on her door. It kicked it in. Ellie survived. The neighborhood healed. And the HOA. It became a warning for others. Never hand power to someone just because they smile while swinging the gavel. Because sometimes the real danger isn't outside your home. It's running the bake sale. So next time you're offered a cookie at a community BBQ, or maybe ask who made it. Or better yet, bring your own. Thanks for watching the full series. Hit that like if you stayed through the storm. Subscribe for more stories that dig beneath the picket fences. And remember, not every neighbor wants to be your friend. Some just want control, and some want revenge.